There's one window that hasn't featured in these last few videos, and that's the window by the font. As you come into church, it's on your left. It's one of the modern windows, and it features St. Thomas. He's sneaked his way in. I hope James the Great doesn't mind that. It shows some pictures of Wrightington life. It's got a miner, it's got a basket maker, and Jesus as a carpenter. Definitely looking through the marriage registers recently, you see how many people in this area were miners and how many were basket makers. Many, of course, worked in the cotton mills. But yeah, those are two of the trades that are local to this area, or they were in the past. So I read up a little bit about St. Thomas, because you've got a king on the window, King Gondophares, or as it's described on our particular window, King Gundapho. He looks a bit like a Viking, but he's a king of India, and Thomas himself doesn't look particularly Jewish. He looks very English, to be honest, a bit monkish too. I wondered what the story was. It's funny that we've got a link to India. When we were in India, because we stayed with the vicar when I was on sabbatical, and certainly the church that he was part of, you could see, was linked to when the British were there and India was a colony. And yet the church in India looks back to being founded by Thomas. I'd like to remind people of this, that it wasn't the English who brought Christianity to India, but it links back to the legend of St. Thomas. I did do a video about St. Thomas about 6 weeks ago. It's surprising how long we've been doing this, isn't it? About believing Thomas. He does keep popping up, you know. He's one of my favourites. He was there yesterday. Came along to the funeral when we said goodbye to David DeVille with his family and neighbours who came and were there in the car park. St. Thomas, who poses the question to Jesus, "Where is it you're going? We don't know where you're going." To which Jesus replies, hinting, "Thomas, you do know. I am the way, the truth, and the life," he says. Thomas was the disciple who seemed to take the longest to figure out exactly where Jesus had transplanted and planted him to. Anyway, the story of this window is that Thomas was in Caesarea, and God says to him, "You need to go to see this king in India." So off he goes. King Gundapho wants him to be the architect of a huge palace, more splendid than the ones in Rome. So he gives him the resources to do that. Then he disappears for 2 years. When he comes back, there's been no palace built. Thomas instead has distributed the money to the poor and needy. King Gundapho is not happy, sticks him in prison according to the legend, and then tries to think, what am I going to do with this guy? And then the king's brother dies. 4 days later, in one of the accounts, he comes back to life and he says, "You know what? Thomas has built this huge palace in heaven for me, your brother." I suppose the twist, or the thing to the story is, Thomas, in serving the poor, has built for himself treasures in heaven and been an architect of a great palace. So King Gundapho relents and, I guess, is converted. And that's what you see in the picture, is Thomas preaching to King Gundapho. And so you get the start of Christianity in India, or so the legend goes. There is a text that's written as part of the window that comes along with the story. In some ways it reminds me of something we looked at a few weeks ago in John. John tells us in his first letter, "Love not the world, neither the things that are in the world. Because if you love the world, the love of the Father is not in you." We need to have space for God's love to be in us and to not waste our time. At the very end of John's letter, he says this little sentence, "Keep yourselves from idols." Don't worship things and get entangled with things other than God. And the text on this window says this, attributed to Thomas, replying to the king, explaining what he's done. He says, "Knowest thou not that those who would possess heavenly things have little care for the things of this earth?" Living out what John said, "Knowest thou not that those who would possess heavenly things have little care for the things of this earth?"